The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Ask anyone who knew him. They will tell you that Raphael Skinner lived an exceptional life. He was an athlete with NBA and NFL dreams. A loving big brother who made French toast for his younger siblings. But at the age of 12, Raphael lost his life. For his mother, Marquisha, the passing of her beautiful son was devastating. But it comforts her to know that Raphael continues to make an incredible impact on lives across the nation. Raphael is a tissue donor. His heart valves saved 2 lives. His ligaments enabled a young volleyball player to leap again. In all, his donated tissues have saved or improved the lives of over 50 recipients.
A tissue donor can save anywhere from 50 to 100 to 200 lives. A lot of people refer to organ donation as life-saving, and tissue donation as life-enhancing. But at ARORA, we include all of them and call them as being life-restorative.
For Marquisha, Raphael's donation was more than a gift to others. It was a healing gift from son to mother.
One of the most difficult parts of grieving, and one of the tasks of grief, is to find meaning in a loss where there's just not. And when someone was able to donate, there's meaning in the fact that there is a 16-year-old girl out there who can jump and still spike a volleyball because of what Raphael gave, and 2 people out there whose hearts are still beating because of the heart valves that he gave. It doesn't take away any of the grief or the hurt, but I think that it
was wonderful because I was like I always say, I was like, well, I probably never know how many people he's helped or what city or location or even met someone that he's helped. But he was a comedian. He liked to play football and basketball. He loved to imitate people. He liked to joke. He liked to draw. He liked to dance. But he was amazing.
Raphael was a nice person. And then when he wanted to get on your nerves, he knowed how to do that too.
I love him and I miss him a lot.
Yeah. Yeah, he really missed him.
In life, Raphael was a spirit that shined. A shine so powerful that even after his passing, it continues to bring light to his family and to those in need.
Good morning and welcome to day 3 of Aurora's Funeral Home Symposium. Aurora appreciates your attendance today. To make sure you receive your CEU certificates, please complete the online survey you will receive at the end of this session. If you don't receive the survey, please email us at webinar@aurora.org. That's webinar, WEBINAR, at ARORA.org. Aurora will also send a list of the attendees to the state board. Now we will have Gerald Curtis, Funeral Home Liaison.
Good morning, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to this, our third and final day of our virtual symposium, which has been quite different for Aurora, as we have done this for some 12 years live and in person, and I miss getting the opportunity to see everyone. It is our pleasure to sponsor this event as a thank you for your continued cooperation and support of donation. Our mission here at Aurora is to restore lives through the recovery of organ and tissue. This does not have to be counterproductive to your mission, but we are wanting to work together hand in hand so we may support and work with the families that we both serve. Aurora pledges our commitment to the funeral directors of Arkansas to provide education relating to the standards of the funeral industry. Our goal is to enhance communication with funeral directors across the state, building relationships, working together for the good of the families we both serve. That's very important to Aurora. And I'd like to introduce our first speaker for the day. She has had excellent reviews for the first 2 days. She's done a wonderful job. We would like to have her back in person if we get to have in-person events again at some point in time, which I'm sure we will. Glenda Stansberry from Oklahoma City. Glenda is the Vice President of Marketing and Development at Insight Books and the Dean and Training Coordinator of Light Insight Institute. She received her special education degree from Central State University in 1976, her Bachelor of Science in Funeral Service from the University of Central Oklahoma in 2005, and her Master's of Administrative Leadership at the University of Oklahoma in 2009. And most importantly, I believe, to our audience today is she is a licensed funeral director and embalmer in the state of Oklahoma. So she understands your situation. She understands the funeral home industry and has many, many years of experience working with all different types of situations. So without further ado, Ms. Stansberry, please take it away. Thank you.
Thank you, Gerald, and welcome everybody from your sister state next door, Oklahoma. I wanted to stop and say this. I haven't for the first 2 days, and if you've been with us for the first 2 days, welcome back. God love you. But but I wanted to just stop and say how much I admire what ARORA does and what LifeShare does in my state, because it is so powerful and so healing for so many people. I told Gerald before we got started, I did a service about 4 weeks ago for a young man who was 12, and he hung himself. The family really thinks it was an accidental suicide, but the joy of all of this tragedy was that he could donate so many things to other people, and that gave them such peace and such a sense of gratitude within all of this devastating grief of losing their youngest son. So I'm just always in awe of what they do, and what ARORA can do in your state for helping families, and it really does assist in the grief process. So now we're going to finish up. For those of you who've been with us, some of this we're going to kind of gather back up and hit again. If this is your first day with us, then you'll hear it for the first time, and kind of put a whole bow around all of the different elements that we've talked about during this week. This is hard for you all. It's hard for me. I'm so used to being in front of people and talking and getting feedback and listening. But thank you for hanging in there and for being an active participant. So we're going to get started here with our slides. And Mike's going to talk to me and say, yes, Glenda, it is fine.
Yes, it is fine.
Thank you, Mike. I appreciate it. So this is what I call Reaper training, and you'll understand why. And I call it a Ranger training, but really it's a much bigger umbrella of step by step, how do we deal with our families, and not just in normal circumstances, but now, how are we dealing with them? So we'll hit a little bit of the COVID situation, as well as how we just look at serving families. And part of the problem that we've all talked about, you can't go to any funeral program or convention or just stand around and have drinks with your buds and not hear people say, boy, I wish it was the good old days back when, everybody was casketed and buried and we knew what we were going to do. And cremation has changed our world, and it's changed our world gradually, but all of a sudden it is here, and it is over. It's the majority of the people that we're serving. So we have to, everything we talk about has to be looked at partly through the lens of service to every family who walks in, but specifically to the cremation families. We talked the first day specifically about cremation families, but I want to reiterate the thing that we have to remember about our cremation families is they have options. They can walk out the door. They could take their urn and leave. They don't have to have you do anything except take care of the body. And so getting them to stay, getting them to understand the value of service, getting them to be a part of that experience is the most important thing. Your cremation rate means little. Your service rate is where you're serving your families and where your revenue comes from. And so that's partly why we're going to kind of go through some of these pieces. So I think part of the mistake we made back when cremation first came into our world, well, it's been in our world forever, but when it really started impacting our business model and how we serve families, is that we didn't know how to deal with it. We reacted badly to it, and we just kind of made it a option that those people choose, rather than it just being another option that people who walk in my doors are going to opt out for. I often tell this story, and I don't remember if I told it. I don't think I did the other day. I started teaching in the mortuary program at University of Central Oklahoma in 2007. And it was very, very kind of them. I went through that program. I was 50 when I went back to get my funeral director license and embalmer license. And then I did that because I felt like I really needed to understand this profession. Doug and I had been doing celebrant training since 1999. I'm standing up in front of funeral directors, telling them how to improve what they're doing. And I thought, I really need to understand this. So I went back to school. And I was working full time. I was traveling, doing celebrant trainings, and I was hauling my microbiology and anatomy books with me wherever I went. It was a pretty sight. But as soon as I finished that degree, then they asked me to start teaching. And so back in 2007, I was still having a lot of second and third generation students who are coming through that program. Daddy has a funeral home and he expects me to carry on the mantle. I don't get that as much anymore. I probably, out of the 60 kids that I have in my classes right now, I probably have 3 that are second or third generation. But some of that has really changed. But anyway, this young man sitting in my class folds his arms over and looks very, very haughty. And he says, "My daddy doesn't serve cremation families. He thinks it just encourages it." This is 2007. And I just looked at him and I said, "Well, you call me when your daddy goes out of business." And sure enough, he did a few years ago for embezzling pre-need funds. But that was the attitude. I don't want to encourage it. I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to be it. And so we made it the secondary choice. We made it the second class choice. We made direct cremation become a thing. So how do we avoid that? And this is kind of a silly little acronym, but I like it. It makes me smile. So I came up with this concept of, full service from beginning to end of how we serve families, and I call it Reaper. So we'll start there. Respond to the pain is your R. Now, if you were with us yesterday, we spent 45 minutes talking about first call and talking about the impacts of first call. So we won't review that, but I will just hit it again because I think it's so important that we lose people at that first call, at that removal, more than we have any idea. How they are treated, how they feel, how they are listened to, how the person who comes in and sits down and listens to them versus the person who comes in and is just the body snatcher. First call is your that's your job interview, if you will. And especially with families who are on the fence about having a service, or who are just leaning toward, let's just have a cremation and not mess with this. If they're not wowed and touched and embraced, if you will, at that first experience, they've got a lot more reason to walk into your arrangement room and say, it's okay. We'll just take care of the body and we'll go. So we talked some yesterday about the death story. Everybody has one. Whether, it was how they, how the person was, waiting before they died. They were waiting for all the kids together, or they waited for everybody to leave the room, or, something happened, a family I served last week, they saw cardinals outside the window right before mom died, and they have seen a cardinal every day since. That's their death story. Whether it makes sense to anybody else, it makes sense to them, and we need to stop and hear that in that process. And then we talked a little bit yesterday about the gap, and that's that time between removal until arrangement. We have become so office bound and so integrated into, I'm sitting here until the family comes to see me, and then that's when business starts. Rather than, we've got hours or days in between that time, I should be checking on that family. If I'm bringing them food, if I'm bringing them paper goods, or if I'm just calling to check on them. Because a lot of decisions, a lot of misinformation, a lot of confusion happens from the time that your van drives away from that house or that hospital or that nursing home until they come into your office. So that gap needs to be really talked about at your firm. How are we staying in touch with these families until we see them? Now, some of it You can, make sure that you are sitting down at first call, hearing the story, listening to them, leaving them information. But do not assume that that big packet of stuff that you left them, they're going to go through. They're in grief, they're overwhelmed, they're sad, they're all kinds of things. So, it's, well, we leave our information. I don't care. I got to tell you, I just went on Medicare. Yes, this hurts my little heart to say this out loud, but because I'm old enough to go on Medicare. And the Medicare supplemental group sent me 4 inches of packets of information. And to this day, it's just sitting on my desk going, I don't know what any of this means. And then I went to see a doctor the other day and they were like, well, what coverage do you have? I went, I don't know. It's too much stuff for me to read. And that's how your families feel. So do not say, I have a packet, I leave it. That's good. No, it's not. They're not reading it. Take care of them, check with them, call them, FaceTime them, bring them donuts, whatever it takes to fill that gap. And then let's talk about when they come in for arrangements. And of course, during COVID, that has been switched a lot. We're having more online or FaceTime or Zoom or doing everything, on a web-based arrangement piece. But let's just, talk about when we do the arrangement in whatever method that might be, because the basics don't change. We have to stop and hear the stories first. We have such a tendency to sit down and get right to business. Now, some of you all were with us yesterday, and at the end, I told you a story about my mother and our experience with her dying, and the experience with the first call when an old guy showed up with the cot and had no words of condolence, had no idea what to do, just was there to pick up the body. The only words he said to us was, what are you thinking? Which was, funeral speak for, are you going to embalm? And he left. And we spent the evening furious at how we had been treated. We'd spent 2 days sitting with our mother, watching her as she declined and as she went to, as she ultimately died. And the best we get is some old guy with a cot saying, what you thinking? So we walk into the arrangement room the next day. The owner of the funeral home made her special arrangements to be there on a Saturday because it was Doug and it was Glenda coming in to make arrangements, and this was a big deal for him. And he sits down and he says, I'm so sorry for what brings us here today. We really pride ourselves on doing the best services in the city. Now, how many death certificates do you think you're going to need? And Doug and I and my sisters just looked at each other and went, you're kidding, right? This is how we're starting. And it was bam, 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 down the road. Let's make sure we fill in all the boxes and fill in all the blanks. That was 10 years ago. I've done services for that funeral home since. I like those funeral directors. They're good guys. I trust them. That's why I called them in the first place. But let me tell you what, there's not a single person at that funeral home who knows anything about my mother. As a matter of fact, I did a service for that funeral home probably a couple of years ago. And the funeral director came up and hugged me. Glenda, how you doing? How long has it been since your dad died? Well, it was my mom. So if we are not invested in hearing the story first, then, then we've lost them. It's just business at that point, because so many people don't see value in service. They've seen bad service. They've seen impersonal service. They've seen harmful service. So why am I going to spend money for that? And we become the order takers. Do you want fries with that? Kind of mentality, rather than tell me the story. Tell me the story. So we have got to engage first. Business will come second. When I sit down with families, I literally hold up my legal pad and show them. I have a blank piece of paper, and we're going to spend time with you telling me about your husband. And then we're going to decide what elements need to be included in that service so that it will honor every part of his life. But first, the stories. And it's amazing. If you show them a blank piece of paper, they're going to respond. You know, we talked some yesterday about getting in their buckets. I'm not going to reiterate that, but I do want to say again, for those of you who didn't listen, this is a term that we use a lot. I use it with my students at the funeral in the mortuary program. I use it with my celebrants. We talk about getting in their buckets. Now, basically what that means is being so attuned to what's going on with them. What are they feeling? What are their needs? What's going on with them? It takes so much pressure. I mean, this sounds like a fun technique, but it actually takes so much pressure off of you, because you don't have to have the words. You don't have to have the answers. You're just responding to what's going on with them. And it helps you get focused. It helps you get focused if you're thinking about it going to first call. It helps you get focused in arrangement. If I'm sitting down with a family who just lost an 18-week gestational baby, what's in their bucket? If I'm sitting down with a family who just lost a 38-year-old to suicide, what's in their bucket? What do I need to respond to? What do I need to hear? So it helps us get more laser focused, if you will, on listening to them and not feeling like we have to have the words or the answers. I tell my students all the time, you know, probably the handiest word that I have to use when I'm sitting with families is wow. Wow, I can't imagine what that felt like for you. Wow, what a shock. What a long journey you've been on with your mom and Alzheimer's. And then you just let them talk. And it makes such a difference. You know, tell me about, hear the death story, open by remembering. I have even had a ceremony at arrangement. I light a candle. I ask them to bring their memorabilia or their pictures, put it on the table, rather than just, hey, bring your stuff so we can display it at service. Let's make the arrangement part of the sacred service. And so I light a candle and say, all of our time together today will be so focused on how we're going to honor Bill and all of the stories that need to come out and all of the pieces that are going to be meaningful to you. It creates a different thing than how many death certificates do you need. And then you've got the we want to party people. You know, I don't want a funeral, I want a party. And so what they have in their head of what a party looks like may be much, much closer to reality of what we're used to than we even think. But we jump to conclusions and we assume that what they say is what we interpret. If they say a simple cremation, what does that mean? If they say a direct burial, what does that mean? If they say, I want a non-traditional service, what does that mean? If they say we want a party, what does that mean? Don't assume and don't try to put them into your little boxes of services. Ask the question. And I said this the other day, but I'm going to say it again because I think it's so important. Probably the most powerful words you could ever say to a family is, tell me what that looks like for you. I want a party. Tell me what that looks like for you. Well, I want, you know, some music and I want some pictures and I want some candles. Okay, let's talk about how we can put all of that together into something that people are going to walk away from glad that they came, glad that they heard the stories. We have to be promoters and guides and not just give up and check a box and, you know, go on to the next thing, because that is the most important thing. They're looking to us for guidance, even if they don't recognize that. And if we just, you know, whatever's on the sheet, we're going to check, we lose it. And if you don't believe that funerals are important to grieving families, they're certainly not. So then how do we articulate the options? We've heard the stories, we've let them talk, we've gathered all of those pieces. How do we articulate the options? Why are people walking out of the door with the urn in their hands? They've seen what we have to offer and they aren't interested. So we have to think differently, you know, rather than saying, this is package A, this is package B, this is package C. That's all just the set design stuff and the moving parts. We want to say, how do we put together something that is meaningful for you and touches you? And part of that struggle for all of us, especially those of us here in Arkansas and Oklahoma in the Bible Belt in that area, is we are so set up to do church service, religious service, denominational service, traditional service. And the people that are walking in these days are just looking at you like, nope. This is a study that came out and was published in CNN last year. For the first time, no religion has topped a survey of American religious identity. The non-religious edged out Catholics and evangelicals in the long-running General Social Survey. Ryan Berg found that 23.1% of Americans now claim no religion. Catholics came in at 23, evangelicals were 22.5. Now, that certainly has implications for the religious community and for the churches to figure out why their back doors are bigger than their front doors. And I get that. I mean, I've been involved in church my whole life. I'm a Baptist preacher's kid. I've played the piano since I was 6 years old. I get that. But I also understand that if we are set up for a certain niche of society, and that niche is shrinking quickly, then we've got to be much more mobile and flexible in how we're serving people. Because if not, again, they have options and they'll walk out the door. And one of the things that I want to talk about, and this is, you could take this for what it's worth, but part of the problem is that when people walk into our places of business, they're walking into church. Where do we have services? In the chapel, and we've got the stained glass, and we've got the religious, pieces and the iconography and all of those things. And if I am somebody who religion or tradition and those kind of pieces do not speak to me, this is not someplace I want to honor my loved one. It just isn't. And so we have to look with new eyes at what we are offering to our families. The Apple Store changed its look when they realized that people wanted to come in and wander and stand at desks and be able to be part of the in crowd rather than come up, stand at a counter and just talk to one person. They understood their customer. So this much more flexible. You can bring in crucifixes or produce or any kind of thing that you need, but it makes it a much more flexible opportunity that reaches many more people. We have to really look at that. I have funeral homes here that I work for that, they're very proud of the fact that they remodeled in 1970 and they're real excited about it. Or I'm not changing that. My granddaddy built that and I'm not going to change it. I get it. But guess what? Your public doesn't care what your granddaddy liked. Your public wants something that's comfortable. Because change is inevitable, and funeral service is the hardest place to embrace that. Now, if we were seeing each other, I would ask you if you knew what this was. You do not. This is opening day at Disneyland, 1955, actually this month, or last month. This was what Disneyland in California looked like on opening day. Does it still look like that? Nope, because the public changed, their customers changed, people had different expectations. Now we've got all of the movies and bright colors and all kinds of things going on because they knew what their customer wanted. 3 years ago, I took my grandsons and my younger daughter to Disney World. And we stood in line for 2 hours to get a picture with a Wookiee. Now, if the people at Disney now had said, well, Walt didn't think that we were going to have, Star Wars or, that kind of stuff, we shouldn't add that because Walt didn't imagine it, then they would die. We can't rely on what Grandpa's vision was. We have to understand what our customer now is looking for. So we paint the picture, and we paint it with enthusiasm and with passion and with creativity of how we can do something to bring people together. These are some words. A gathering is a sacred moment of remembering that will be important to you on your grief journey. I always tie these to the grief journey. This isn't just a one day slam bam, let's do this because we're supposed to. These are first steps in your grief journey. What important people in your life need to hear the story of your loved one? What would be a wonderful way to honor your loved one? Is there special music that will represent your husband's life? Who would like to come be a part of a final farewell? Helping them understand that this is just not an ordeal that we have to go through. Words matter and how we say that. And if you say, well, package A is a traditional service with a casket and burial, and package B is a cremation with an urn, that means nothing. We have to paint pictures for them in what it's going to feel like. And then, you know, when I die, they're going to put the word ceremonies on my gravestone, because I am such a fan and such a believer and such an advocate and of what ceremony can do and what ceremony does for people and what it does for us as we're trying to help our people. So, you know, I think of, you know, I'm a funeral director, I'm a guide, I'm a consultant, I'm a, you know, I'm a rock, I'm all kinds of things. But at the end of the day, if we can change our viewpoint to think of ourselves as ceremony specialists, that really does expand what it is that we feel comfortable doing, getting comfortable in our skin doing, and thinking differently about, you know, funeral director stands at the back of the room and watches the thing go by and make sure the church truck doesn't fall over and the flowers are in the right place. You know, I want to be somebody who is a specialist at creating ceremonies and creating special times. And of course, the COVID complication piece has been that, you know, we've had, you know, either immediate disposition with no service and people haven't had a chance to gather, or we've had virtual services or isolated services. And that's, you know, that has felt still very apart. I've done services on Zoom with nobody in the room. I've done services on Facebook Live with 10 people in the room and 100 people outside watching. I've done, you know, all kinds of different kinds of services since all this began. And it's hard. I mean, there's no doubt about it. We've had to adapt quickly to what's going on. Many of them got changed to a graveside service because we couldn't be inside, and that's okay. But you know, it doesn't have the same opportunities for a full ceremonial experience like you would inside. Or you got people who are waiting for a service. And I got to tell you, if you've got a list of people at your funeral home who say, we'll be back, they're not coming back. Not unless you do something intentional to bring them back. Because, especially if they had a cremation, you know, let's just not bother with that. It's already done. You know, the urn's on the mantle. Why should we get back together? So it becomes a cloud hanging over their heads. And when becomes maybe, becomes later, becomes never. I talked to a funeral director in Ohio. He has 55 pending services on his books. Not going to happen. They're just not, unless you do something to bring them back. So one of the things I would suggest is have a community service. You know, we're getting close enough to the holidays that you could certainly make that a holiday service. If you've never done a community outreach service or a holiday service, this is the year to do it. Even if you do it on Facebook Live or invite all your people to join by Zoom, because this is the year to acknowledge that this grief feels different. This grief feels doubled. This grief feels bigger. So if you've ever considered doing a community service or a holiday service, this is the year to do it, to bring people back and physically invite your families back. I showed this on Monday. You have a whole resource book that Aurora is going to send out to you, and these words are in it. So don't worry about it. You're going to have this. Just to say to them, hey, we're waiting to walk with you. I have one funeral home who took these words and put them into printed them on a card with the picture that the family had provided for the obituary that went online, even though they didn't have a service. So they put that picture on the front of the card and then put these words inside to invite people back. Dear, you've been in our thoughts since the passing of Bill. We know that experiencing a death in such an uncertain and unsettling time meant that you had to make difficult decisions about where and when you could gather to honor this life. Experts in the field of grief all agree that one of the most important steps in the grief journey is the act of gathering. Grief delayed is not grief diminished. And the most important thing that can be done is to create a time for remembering. Giving voice to the story, seeing the pictures, hearing words of comfort, and special music are vital components of creating a safe space to express your loss. Perhaps you put your plans for a funeral on hold and are now wondering if it is necessary or valuable. Our experience in walking with families tells us it is never too late to have a time to remember. We invite you to contact us to discuss how we can create a sacred space for remembering your loved one. It could be a traditional service or a placing of the urn or a time of sharing and communing with others. This could be in person, depending on the restrictions in your area, or we could stream it so all your friends and family can participate. Your journey is our journey, and we stand ready to walk with you as you find meaningful ways to say goodbye. This says to them, I'm thinking about you, I'm your guide, I'm your specialist, come back and we'll figure this out. We showed this when we were talking about cremation the other day. I am such a huge fan of urn arc when we start talking about ceremonies. It's a dignified and honorable way to process an urn in, to process an urn out, to especially at churches. It just is a magical way to create a different kind of ceremony around the urn, because we have a tendency, again, to treat the urn just like a piece of furniture up at the front with some flowers around it, rather than this is your casket. Think of it as a casket rather than an urn. And how would you treat a casket? Then let's treat the urn the same way. I'm not going to go over this when we did this when we were talking about cremation families, but I pulled it up again just because I am such a fan of having a ceremony when families come in to receive the urn. Especially now, you may have some COVID families that had their loved one cremated in March or April or May, and it's still sitting there. Having a ceremony. This may be the only ceremony that they get. And again, these words that I have up here on the screen are part of the resource book that's going to be sent to you. But I just want to offer again how important it is to create a ceremony around cremation and around receiving of the urn and receiving of the cremated remains. Another way, whether you have had a service already, or if this is the only service you're going to get to have, when the family comes back, maybe they had a cremation and they are ready to place an urn, or maybe they had an immediate burial and now they're ready to do something different. Offer hallowing of the ground. Do something ceremonial. I cannot tell you how many times I see funeral directors just go out and kind of stand there and ashes to ashes kind of thing. And it really does need to be something special. And this may be the only thing that they get. This may be the only ceremony they get. So offer something special for them. It's not that hard. There's about 2 minutes of words here, but it creates such a sense of gathering. You could do casket signings. I'm sure some of you all have seen this. This family specifically chose to have a black casket so that they could have a casket signing. It's just another wonderful way to have a ceremony there at graveside. One of my favorite new things, I had a funeral director who loved to do balloon releases, especially for babies. And he and I have kind of specialized in babies. I've done probably 40 baby services for him in the last 2 years, either miscarriage, early gestational loss, or stillbirth, or baby loss. So we've been pretty busy doing those kinds of services. And he was doing a balloon release at everyone. And I said, I'm just really not comfortable with this anymore. Environment, blah, blah. Let's do bubbles. And so he went out and bought big industrial sized bubble machines. I think they cost $100 or $150. So after the service, we can bring the family outside. and say words and play bubble and have some music and do bubbles. You know, bubbles have such power to bring a smile to our hearts. You just can't be sad when bubbles are bouncing around, creating joy and magic. Bubbles remind us that even though they are here for but a moment, the memory stays with us and continues to stay in our minds. Just like Grace and Mercy, this happened to be twins that died in utero, who were here for the blink of an eye. They will stay with you for the rest of your lives. Their story will sparkle in the sun and never disappear. Take a few moments to revel in the sacred space here, surrounded by family and friends. Feel the love, carry it with you into your days to give you strength when the times seem hard, to give you light when the nights are dark. Bree and Jesse, blessings upon you and Sullivan and the rest of the family. We honor your wisdom and your faith that will sustain you. Go in peace and take care of each other. Offer grace and mercy every day. So this is just another really special, easy kind of ceremony that we can offer to make people walk away from a service going, wow, I'm so glad I came. I'm so glad I saw that. I'm so glad this was an important moment for me. I did a service last week, as a matter of fact, for a 70-year-old man who had had a artificial heart valve for years, and it finally gave up. And one of the daughters came up to me afterwards. She's probably in her 30s, and she said, "I cannot believe this." She said, "I was the advocate for cremation, no service, because I've been to so many bad services, and here you are creating such a wonderful story for our dad and giving us such a time together and to grieve together. I cannot believe that I almost missed this because I just was going off of what I had always known." And I would say, especially for this year, if you do not participate in an aftercare program or send out, resources or books or cards, this is the year to do it. This is, aftercare should not be an afterthought, especially for those families who didn't have a service this year because of COVID or had a limited service, or for those families who are still waiting to have a service. This sounds a little self-serving. I sell aftercare books. I get it. But I don't care if you use our books or whatever, but if you've never thought about doing aftercare, this is the year to do it. And so our final one is refer celebrants or appropriate officiants. I can't believe that I've talked for 3 days, and this is really the first time that I've actually said celebrants. This is just unlike me. But this is not just about celebrants. This is about how we approach every family. But the fact of the matter is that we have a lot of families who we are handing inappropriate officiants. Family walks in, we don't go to church, we don't want to we don't have a preacher, we don't want a traditional service, and we say, here's Reverend Rolodex, he does all of our services for us, for these people, and he'll do a pretty good job. Now, what I'm going to say to you is, do you want a pretty good embalmer? Do you want a pretty good florist? And you're willing to hand over to somebody who is really, everybody who comes, this is what they're going to see, and they're going to judge your firm and your service on, and you say he does a pretty good job, and he may or may not get the name right. No, it's time to get away from that and not offer Reverend Rolodex, and to make sure that you've got other options and other officiants who actually can do something right. Now, we have been training celebrants since 1999. We've trained over 4,200 celebrants around the world, specifically to fit the needs of those families who do not want, do not need, cannot handle what we would consider a traditional religious denominational service. So celebrants are people who are trained to seek meet the needs of families during their time of loss. We provide customized personal funeral and memorial services that reflect the personality and lifestyle of the deceased. It takes me 6 to 10 hours every service to write, because I start from scratch every time. 3 weeks ago, I did 5 services in 1 week. I almost died. That was a lot. But, because everybody deserves a brand new service every time. So resources that you're going to receive are 2. We have a sample ceremonies resource book that I give out at these kinds of presentations. And it's got resources. It's got sample master of ceremonies. It's got sample handing over cremated remains. It's got a sample holiday service. There's all kinds of things in there that you can take and adapt and use. And if you're not used to that kind of ceremonial writing, feel free to use some of those pieces. If you don't do anything after this week, go back and talk about how are we treating our cremation families when they come to pick up urns. How are we offering a gathering time? How are we changing how we do arrangement with our families? Then the other resource you're going to get is a resource that we wrote in March. As soon as COVID hit, as soon as quarantine hit, as soon as everything shut down, I said to our celebrants, wow, we're made for this because we are creative, we are flexible, we know how to work in difficult situations. And so we sat down that weekend and wrote a short resource book called Ceremonies Together from Afar, and gave suggestions for how to have services and ceremonies and opening words and closing words. The bubble ceremony that I showed you is in there, just to give everybody some support and some encouragement as we were trying to navigate brand new waters and try to figure out how to offer services. The reason I am so passionate about doing good service is because the ultimate test is grief is a social problem if it's not handled well. I was called to do a service for this girl. Her story was, when she was 12, her mother dropped dead in front of her from an aneurysm. So you've got a 12-year-old girl at home alone with a dead mom on the floor. I'm sure at the time they did everything they could, but well, kids are resilient and she'll be fine and she'll be sad and it's okay. When she was 21, she was diagnosed with stage 4 non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. And so she had to drop out of college. She had to undergo 2 brutal years of treatment. She was told she would not survive, and she did survive. But if she ever was, wanted to grieve the loss of time, the loss of her college experience, the loss of all of those pieces, people would have just said, get over it. You're well. So, what's to grieve? And so there's more grief that just piles on top. And then she married a man who, a soldier, and he was an Apache helicopter pilot during the height of the Gulf War. And so he was deployed to Iraq, in Iran, and Afghanistan 5 different times. And nobody really talks about the pain and the fear of sitting at home with 2 little kids, not knowing if the phone's going to ring or there's going to be a knock on the door every day, and what that does to you inside, and how you grieve the loss of normalcy and the loss of having a husband there. She became a hoarder, which is a very typical indication of unresolved grief and problems. Hoarded her house. She's got a 6-year-old and a 4-year-old, and this is a problem. So the family finally came to her and said, we want to help you. We want to be there for you. Let us help you clean your house. Let us help you get help. And she walked into the bathroom that Saturday morning and shot herself in front of her husband. And everybody wanted to look at the last straw. But in my world, we look at what happened when she was 12, and grief never got resolved. And that's why I am so desperately passionate about making sure that every family's needs are met. Every family has the service that fits them. Every family has that ability to honor that grief and start resolving it and start down that path to resolving it. Because healthy families mean healthy business for us, and a healthy society, and healthy ways for us to be able to make sure that we provide all of the tools that we can for each of our families. And that's it. So I got through on time. I am so excited. So I guess I turn this back over to Mike and Robbie.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you very much, Miss Glenda. If you have any questions, please put your questions in the questions box below, and Robbie will read them.
All right, so our first question is from Clayton Barnes. How to address the situation that a church wants to take over service aspects on all members' deaths?
That is a problem, and it is something, it just creates, you're going to have to create some relationships, because if they don't know you and don't know what you are and don't know what you do, then they see no need for you. I experienced that when I started going to the church that I attend. It's a UCC church. It's very, everybody gets cremated there. We're kind of the little left-wing social justice church. And when I started going there, the pastor's attitude literally was, we have deacons, we've got a guild, why do we need a funeral home? And I started saying constantly, you need to tell your families to use funeral homes. Those people do more than just stand at the back and hand out service folders. You have no idea all the things that they are taking care of for families. And then we had a service for a young man, he was 12, that died of cancer. And we had 600 people, in our church, and the funeral directors were there, and they took care of everything, and everything ran smoothly. And my pastor looked at me and said, wow, can we have them there every time? Yes, if you are the proactive one who helps people understand what it is that the funeral home does. If the first question that you have when the family calls you is, and what funeral home are you using? That helps set that standard. But that's a relation building thing. I do a lot of how to plan for your service. I do that for my congregation. I do it for other churches, and I go in as a funeral director, but as not one who works for a particular firm. So I'm not selling that firm, and talk about the value of service and the value of funeral and the value of what we do. So I think it is some lunches and some relationships with, can we talk about what all it is that we can do to work together to serve your families? Because there's a lot of things that we can take off your plate. There's a lot of things we can do that allows you to do your important work. I mean, you got to stroke their egos. I mean, let's just get over it. You got to make sure that they feel important, but also recognize that this is not their bailiwick. They didn't go to funeral school. So let me help partner with you. So it's relationship building in a whole lot of ways.
Okay, Glenda.
No.
All right, and then I have another one here. Glenda says, hi, it is Heather Marcellus. So good to hear your voice. Have you done any green barrels? We are doing green barrels in our cemetery, and I am struggling with the words that give deeper meaning to the process.
I have done a few. And part of the problem is that finding cemeteries that will allow them. But I've done probably about 6. I have one funeral home who really, promotes it and has a wicker casket and that kind of thing. I don't know that I changed the words that much. I mean, I'm hallowing the ground, and I'm talking about what that means for the family. And, I do talk some about that their wish was to, protect the ground that they are in and those kind of things. But I honestly, Heather, I mean, you can go a lot of different ways with that. I don't know that I really change a lot of what I say at graveside, except just to make sure that we acknowledge the wishes of the person. I had one the other day. Oh my gosh. It was going to be a green burial. But the granddaughter, who was so very close to this man, he adored her, she adored him, and she said, we have to have a balloon release at Grandpa's, cemetery. And I'm like, this is a green burial. I don't want to do a balloon release. But the mom and the grandma said, oh, of course, So here we are, lowering a wicker casket with ropes and having a balloon release, and I felt really guilty. And I went home and apologized to Mother Nature for that. But I just treat it as another graveside, if you will. Just make sure that we're hallowing the ground and letting people know how important it is to honor that life.
Okay, and I have 2 thank yous here. One is from Ebony saying thanks for all the information. Is going to be very useful. And then Vicky Parks also says she liked the candle idea.
Okay. Good.
I have one more question here. This is from Betty Dillard. How do you help the family get started in telling their death story?
You know, a lot of that depends on setting, if it's at first call or if it's an arrangement or whatever. But, you know, I just sit down. First words out of my mouth are going to be, I am so sorry about your husband, and which feels different than I'm so sorry for your loss. You know, find out who the relationship is and speak to it. And so when I'm sitting down with the family and I look at the wife and say, I'm so sorry about Jim. And if I know any of the background, you know, if I know he's been sick for a while, then I can say, this has been a journey for you. And then let her talk. If I don't know the background, if I don't know, you know, how he died, I can just say, tell me about the journey you've been on with him. Was this sudden or had he been sick for a while? And then shut up and let them talk. And they will. I mean, they absolutely will. And you just kind of let you know, open the door and let them give it to you. I told the group the other day, I did a service 2 weeks ago for a 38-year-old who died of suicide after heroin addiction, and she slit her wrist and slit her neck, and her sister found her. And so I sit down with the sister first before I see the rest of the family. And I mean, this is what she needed to talk about. She needed to tell me what that felt like. And all I said to her was, wow, I cannot imagine how shocking that was for you and how devastating that was for you. And then just let it go and let her say it. So I don't think we have to have real fancy words. We just have to open those doors without judgment, without assumption, and let them talk.
Thank you, Glenda. Just want to let everybody know, yes, we will be sending out the presentation that Glenda has done. We're doing that for all 3 days, so that will be coming to you. Trying to see, there is,
I believe that's all.
I have one more. I got one question here, and this is going to be our last because we're running late now here. I have a last question from Joseph Anthony. Glenda, during the graveside ceremony, we often allow family members to take place to, I'm sorry, reading this whole wrong. We often allow family members to place flowers on the casket. However, I would really like your idea of using a magic marker to leave a lasting message. I really like that.
Yeah. The other thing I've done is to invite people to come by and put their hand on the casket and say, you know, these fingerprints will go with Jim into eternity and be with him as an eternal hug. So there's all kinds of things that you can do around graveside that, you know, either take flowers, put your fingerprint, sign it, you know, just be creative, you know, think way outside the box, destroy the box, think of different things that you can do.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Ms. Stansberry. We appreciate you for being with us the last 3 days.
Thank you.
As Robbie said, we will have a presentation posted pretty soon.
Okay. Thank you.
Our capacity to show strength, to love unconditionally, and to do good in the world is certainly not dependent on our physical stature. If anyone demonstrates this, it's Lane Beelan. Born premature at 22 weeks, weighing only 1 pound, 13 ounces, he was not expected to survive, but he did. His joy for life was inspirational, and his impact on the lives of others was nothing short of heroic.
Lane was born on November 28th, 2012. He was born 16 weeks early. They flew him to Big Baptist in Little Rock, and that's where our journey started. It was such a roller coaster, but you held on to those high points so hard. 136 days we made, and we got to take him home. Once he could be Lane and he wasn't so sedated or wasn't on a ventilator, Lane loved life. He was kicking and playing, and he was the light that lit up every room. He loved to be loved, and he smiled Oh, he smiled. We were being told that life would be limited. He's done great. He's beat all the odds. But when they tell you that it's always he can't, when he can, that just becomes more of a fight. And that's what, Lane could. September of 2015, Lane was having a lot of seizures. And the only way to fix these seizures was to do a procedure called a hemispherectomy. During the procedure, Lane suffered 2 strokes that left him blind, and he had some other complications. So we spent another, 4 months in the hospital with that. True Lane passion, he came out doing great. We went back in for our boost in April of 2017. Lane wasn't responding at all. We'd been there not quite a week, and the doctor came in, and she thought he had about 6 more months. She said, we'll let you go home, and you can do everything that we're doing. So I said, great. That night came, everything was the same. One of the nurses came in and held Lane while I went and packed the car. And came back and put Lane in bed, and I crawled in next to him, and I dozed off about 1 o'clock. But when I got up, I looked at his monitor. I punched the button, and I told the nurse, you got to tell me this isn't real. And she said, I can't do that. So at that time, I knew he was going home, but he wasn't going home with me. When Lane decided it was time to go home, the palliative care nurse came in and told me that he could not be an organ donor. And then a little while later, another hour or so later, she came back and she said he could be a donor, but he was not able to donate organs. He could only donate his tissues.
It is actually really common for someone not to be able to donate organs, but to be eligible to donate tissue. In Lane's case, he was able to donate his heart for valves, and 2 life-saving grafts were made for somebody who needed a valve transplant.
I wanted him to live on to somebody. I didn't know of tissue donation. I didn't even understand what tissue donation was. Lane's a hero. He was my hero long before he passed away. And then after he passed away, he became 2 other people's hero.
ARORA exists to help Arkansans by maximizing the opportunities for organ, tissue, and eye donation in the state. And we help to restore lives by recovering organs for transplants. But we can't do it without you.
Tissue donation is very special to me because I am a tissue recipient myself. I know how it changed my life. So for Lane to be able to do that for other people, it's really important.
Most people looked at Lane and all they saw was broken. I looked at Lane and all I saw was beautiful. And Lane taught me that. I think his life was as full as it could possibly be. And even into the end of his life, he gave.
Because of you, honoring the lives of people like Lane is possible. Register to become an organ, tissue, and eye donor. Our capacity.
We will now take a 5-minute break.
Well, welcome back. I just want to remind you that over the last few days, we've played these donor, family, and recipient videos, and it's to share a connect to purpose with you, is to show you what you are a part of and how important it is that we're able to work together to grant the wishes of the deceased and their families. It's very, very important. Now, this next speaker we have with us, I've been looking forward to this. He comes with us with many excellent qualifications. His name is Dr. Mario Wallace. He is the president of All Things Strategic and the general manager of Afterlife Solutions. With more than 20 years of small business consulting experience and 11 years of healthcare consulting experience, he has considerable expertise in the areas of strategic business management, process improvement, change management, leadership development, medical education, and program instructional development. Dr. Wallace received his doctoral degree from Walden University in Business Administration Leadership. He's also received several postdoctorate certificates. The one that's very important to us today is his certificate in COVID-19 contact tracing certification from Johns Hopkins University. Dr. Wallace, thank you for agreeing to be here with us today and talking about the effects of COVID-19 on the funeral home industry. Thank you, sir.
Dr. Wallace, you need to unmute your mic. There you go.
Okay. Well, thank you, Curtis, and I'm glad to be here, and especially and thank your team for all the work they've done to make this event as positive and effective as it has been over the last 2 or 3 days. So my name is Dr. Mario Wallace. I'm the president of All Things Strategic and general consultant and operation manager for Afterlife Mortuary Solutions, in which we serve as both Tennessee and Arkansas. My son Marco is more of the driver of the business, where I am more of the trainer and the business strategist. I'm also a qualitative researcher. And I've researched the funeral industry in depth for multiple years to understand the operations and the behaviors. Today, the name of this presentation is The State of Funeral Industry During Times of Pandemic. And the theme that we're going to find throughout the presentation is, are you ready? You know, are you prepared? Were you prepared? This is a question that I know that most of us have asked ourselves throughout this pandemic, as we found ways to ensure the sustainability of our business, as well as to grow our business. So, Mike and Robert, you turn the slides? Or do I move forward?
Whichever way you would like it. Would you like me to do it?
Okay, let me see.
Let me give you control.
Okay.
You should have control now.
Okay, so nothing is moving, so maybe you go ahead and take.
Okay.
You have it?
Yes, sir.
Okay, just move forward one slide.
Just a second, let me get myself back control.
Okay. So the question is, that, as I said earlier, just a second ago, is the theme of the presentation is, are you ready? And that's a question I know that most of us have asked ourselves throughout this pandemic. Are we ready? You can move forward, Mike. So the learning objectives for this presentation is, by the time the presentation ends, you should be able to discuss the global and national pandemic, explain the history of the coronavirus and the symptoms, as well as discuss CDC's mandated changes and their impact on the funeral industry, demonstrate human error prevention strategies, and discuss a pandemic preparedness plan. Not just only discuss it, but also to develop a pandemic preparedness plan. Okay, Mike. You can move forward. So today, this year has been challenging for most people and industries across the globe, specifically the medical industry, healthcare, manufacturing, retail, as well as the funeral industry. As the hospitals became overwhelmed with COVID patients, we became overwhelmed in the funeral industry. Most of us was taken by surprise and had to pivot without a solid plan in place. And one thing that we have to do in the funeral industry and in the industry, we have to always consider plans. So we have to be more foresighted in our thinking to move in our business forward and to adapt to the changing times. You know, our industry, $2 billion industry, was immediately impacted, and we were forced to meet the mandated changes by Centers of Disease and Control and Prevention, or the CDC, as well as the new desired changes from our customers and families, what they expected from us. We also had to figure out how to accelerate training and acclimate our services to meet the needs of the environment. You know, we start looking at new streaming technologies, things that can help us be more, to provide more of a safer service to our family members and clients, as well as a more cost-effective and efficient service for them, and continue to adapt to changes. Although during this time our leaders were indecisive, we still had to continue to make changes to meet the needs of our population target audiences. Okay, you can move forward. Okay. So today we're still living in a global pandemic. All humans are vulnerable to the contagion. And one thing is, as governors seek to flatten the curve and our scientists seek to find a solution, a treatment, and a vaccine, and contact tracers seek to find find Americans who are positive and those who've been exposed to COVID-19. We still have to find solutions to sustain our business, provide the best services to our families, and to grow our business models. But you know what interests me the most is we're living in a time where walking around without a surgical face mask is considered insubordination, and the ideal of inviting a loved one to our houses, or a friend to our houses, to our home, is considered reckless and more of a reckless situation. But that's the time that we're living in, and we have to consider that as funeral owners and directors and embalmers and so forth during this time of pandemic. Because if we think of the numbers internationally, there are more than 900,000 deaths and 30,000 confirmed cases of exposure. If we think nationally, there are more than 200,000 deaths in the United States and more than 4 million cases of exposure, confirmed cases of exposures. Move forward, Mike. One more. Okay, so throughout the pandemic, this is what we see, and this is not a normal situation, what we're seeing. Across the country, across the state, across the country, across the globe, we're seeing people wearing masks to show us how severe the situation is, and that gives us an inclination on what should we do to ensure the safety of everybody we come in contact with, as well as our families and friends, as we provide these services to them in the funeral industry. You know, last month, okay, one more, Mike. You know, less than 6 months ago in New York, we lost over 50,000 Americans in less than 2 months. And weekly, we buried more than 25 indigent Americans in a massive grave on Hart's Island in New York. This is an experience that we saw and we witnessed ourselves to understand the impact of this this COVID-19 and things to help us make adjustments on what to do and how do we move forward. Also, one more, Mike. Also, we also witnessed a mishap from one of the members in the funeral industry. You know, a funeral director stored more than 100 corpses in more than 4 U-Haul vans and parked them on his actual property. And those corpses stayed there for more than a week. The funeral industry the board actually fined him and sanctioned him to the point where his license actually was suspended indefinitely suspended. But you know, the story has it is that there were multiple people involved in this situation. It wasn't just the owner of the funeral home, but there were multiple funeral directors involved in trying to find a way or strategy to actually mitigate the situation over time. But this particular case itself is a clear case of negligence, as well as having no plan and not being prepared. Because of the high volumes volume of death that was taking place in New York, the funeral homes were getting calls, I mean, every minute or every hour for different, from loved ones to actually find ways to arrange funerals for their loved ones. And because of having no strategy, having no true plan, this is a mishap that happened. But at the same time, we should never take bodies and stack them and store them into U-Haul trucks anyway. That was totally against the compliance of the funeral industry. But one thing we should ask ourselves about this and the situation and the time that we're living in is, how do we strategically and effectively move forward and adapt to our new paradigm? How do we sustain and how do we grow during the time of pandemic? And that question is impact. To unpack that question, we have to identify three things. One is, how do we shift our business practices to meet the needs and the concerns of the new environment? The other is, how do we prepare our employees to be safe and to provide safe services and render safe and effective compliant services in the funeral industry? And the third is, how do we create a preparedness plan to ensure in the future that if we're faced with this situation again, how do we move forward? Okay, Mike. One thing that we have to consider is this, and I don't want to talk a lot about the whole concept of the coronavirus, but I want you to look at the slide and think about this. The coronavirus is not new. The term novel coronavirus in COVID-19 meaning that it's a new strand of the virus. And the term 19 means that it's significant because it means that the virus actually, we first identified the virus in 2019 in Wuhan, China. And that's where we get the term COVID-19. The thing about the virus is that it's a severe acute respiratory syndrome. And what that means is that it affects the lungs. And although we practice hand hygiene, one of the main transmissions of the virus, it comes through our lungs. That means that it's basically transmitted as we talk, as we sneeze, and those particulars. The virus is known and has existed for over hundreds of years, from MERS, the Middle Eastern SARS respiratory disease, as well as the SARS, that was maybe the year 2000 and 2002. But the thing about it, this coronavirus come from animals, such as bad rodents and camels. And the scary thing about the coronavirus is that it has the potential to cross species. And when it crosses species, that's when the problem happens. When it goes from animal to human, that's when we're faced with a situation like we're faced with today. Okay, Mike. One more. So as I said before, the virus is mainly transmitted through air droplets, and as you can see here, from a sneeze. It is not an airborne disease. It actually floats in the air through droplets. And thus, that's why we're asked to wear a mask and asked to socially distance, because the concept of a sneeze and where we measure it in the social distances is, as scientists keep telling us to keep a safe space of 6 feet apart from each other, is because the average sneeze travels 6 feet in distance, but that's only the average. If you look at outliers, sneezes can travel 7 feet, 8 feet, 9 feet, up to 15 feet, especially in an area where there is a lot of wind. It can actually travel for miles. So we're told to stay 6 feet apart because of the projection of the sneeze and the air droplets. So the main thing that we need to remember is that the main way that the virus is transmitted, and it's through air droplets. Okay. One thing as a contact tracer, I have to talk with people who've been exposed to the virus, who have to quarantine, and people who've been who've tested positive, who have to isolate, and that's two different things. So isolation is more when a person has the actual virus, they have to isolate for 10 days. A quarantine is when a person has been exposed to the virus and is undergoing testing, hasn't gotten a positive test or negative test at the moment, but throughout that duration have to quarantine for up to 14 days to see if the person would actually become contagious during the time. So the main symptoms of COVID-19 is fever, dry cough, shortness of breath, and loss of smell and taste. And loss of smell and taste is particular to COVID-19. The other three are symptoms that are common to other viruses that already exist. So throughout the time of this COVID, of when people are infected with the virus, the things that they need to always consider is the phases of the virus and how, from a fever to a dry cough, when you have those symptoms, you actually need to go and get tested. Okay. Now, one point that I mentioned in my learning objective is that the CDC made changes to the industry, to the funeral industry, and those changes actually impacted the industry in a way that it left us in a frenzy and a more scared and not knowing what to do at the moment. But certain things that we adapted because, hold 1 second, let me see. So certain things we had to adapt because of the CDC mandates, and some of those mandates were how do we have limited services and to ensure the safety of the family members and friends of the deceased? How do we have barrier services and to ensure a distance to ensure the safety of the families and deceased? How do we actually respect the rights of the family and the rituals of the family and communicate with them that it is not safe to touch the body as it once was before, but also to maintain integrity throughout the funeral process. We also learned about fit testing, how just wearing a face mask doesn't necessarily provide protection, especially in the funeral industry, particularly for embalmers and transporters. But how do we get fit tested from a local health department to ensure that we're providing the right safety for our employees? Okay, you can turn. So one thing that we did learn and we had to adjust is that when transporting a decedent, we have to, according to the CDC mandate, is that inside the bag and outside the bag has to have solution on it, disinfectant solution that can trap and prevent the decedent from exposing us to the virus through, because the virus can still be trapped into the decedent's lungs, and that's a potential for a transmission or a spread of the virus. Also, we had to understand how to better use our protective equipment. And this was a strain for most of us because of resources, because of funding and so forth, but we had to figure out how do we adjust to ensuring that we have the protective equipment and provide the training to our employees to ensure that not only when they're wearing the protective equipment, but how do they take it off and still ensure the safety and integrity of the process to prevent the virus from transmitting. We also had to make sure that we're disinfecting the morgue, our transportation vehicles, the funeral home itself, the sanctuary, and as well as the funeral cars, because of different, because of all the people we're dealing with throughout this particular time. And we do know that not everybody is following the right practices. So we have to ensure the safety. And by ensuring the safety, we have to make sure that we understand what are those environmental decontaminations are, and how do we properly clean to ensure that we're providing a safe environment always to our families and friends of the deceased. But throughout all of the changes that the CDC mandated, these changes actually created what I call a new normal. In this new normal, there were the roles of people in the funeral industry evolved, especially the funeral director, who had to become more than just a business strategy or daily operationalist, but also a champion of public health, meaning have to understand, has to stay abreast of the changes and things that were happening as scientists and leaders begin to report things out daily. That person, that funeral director, had to learn as much information as possible to continue to provide a more safe and a conducive environment during this new normal. So one thing the funeral director had to learn is understanding the 4 points of risk: a low risk, the lowest risk, lower risk, higher risk, and high risk. Meaning that when talking to a family member, the funeral director, for every case in every funeral, in funeral arrangement, a funeral director had to weigh these particular risks when talking to family members, such as when to have a virtual funeral, which is the lowest risk, versus a low risk of a small outdoor funeral with a few family members who are socially distanced and wearing face masks. Also, a more higher risk when a medium-sized group of people actually are present at a funeral, including people that travel from different states. In the funeral, it's either indoors or outdoors. Not everybody is wearing a mask, and not everybody is socially distancing. To a high risk, when most people are just gathered together in spaces, and no one is practicing any of the CDC mandates, we have to be more vice-generous and to ensure that all these things are happening to ensure the safety of the people who are in the space. The funeral director has to be more adept in understanding these particular risks and have to make situational changes according to the funeral. So in the funeral arrangement, and these happens through talking to the loved ones who are making the arrangement. We have to educate them on these particulars. Another thing, a funeral director has become more than a grief counselor, but an educator. The funeral director has to talk with the family members about things that they should be doing, not just arranging a funeral, but these are things that they should be doing in their spaces at home prior to the actual funeral itself. Things such as technology they should be using to virtually connect with family members and friends to actually develop the arrangement for the funeral, or help them to understand that they may need to consider a more modified funeral arrangement, such as limiting the attendance of funerals and using live streaming and different technologies than actually having being in a physical space. Also, educating them on social distancing practices and considering how to modify funeral rites to keep the integrity, but also just modify the funeral rites to such as touching the body itself to keep a more safe environment and prevent the potential transmission of the virus. So one of the main things is technology. So, you know, there's this technology called one room funeral technology. And this technology has really changed the funeral industry. As you see the person to the left, the husband and wife to the left, because of COVID, there's a lack of travel and it's people who live in different states. We have to consider what type of environment can we place them in? How do we ensure that we can provide a service not only to the people who live within the city, but what about people who live in other states and also in other countries? Technology have brought this to the forefront, has allowed us to be able to be more effective and efficient and considerate through the funeral processes. One thing about technology that we need to consider in the funeral industry is it's not changing, it's going to continue to evolve. We have such as single point data entry. Today, any parts of technology creates what we call big data, and big data has to be mined and interpreted to help us make better business decisions. That means that when we think of our staffing and our employees, we have to consider how do we incorporate data into our practices, which is something different, something that we haven't seen before. And data can come from multiple platforms such as social media and websites, where we have the opportunity to learn more about our targeted audience through surveys and questionnaires and things that they can take through these particular platforms to help us to understand. But even if we do that, we have to prepare our team. The funeral industry is not just the primary pieces that we once knew, funeral directors, embalming and transporters and staffing, but also someone who understands data is going to become integral to the funeral industry. And the person who understands data can truly help the funeral, you as a director and people in the industry to actually advance their practices and be more innovative with understanding the data within the technology. And so this was addressed earlier, and I don't want to spend too much time on it, but we have to consider not only the time of COVID, but even pre-COVID, when we consider the millennials as their choice of cremation versus casket funerals. In a recent study, or the statistics show that cremations are up 70% and casket funerals are down 30%. So this is pre-COVID. During COVID, the percent has increased. In fact, Dutch Nye of the National Funeral Directors Association said that we have seen an increase in cremation as never before instead of burial, and it's going to continue. Despite the pandemic, we have to consider the millennials the largest generation that we have today. 90% of them prefer cremation over casket funerals. So what do we do as a funeral home owner? How do we adapt and adjust? How do we find innovative ways to make cremation more attractive and more profitable going forward? How do we do that? Those are some consideration that we have to consider. Hold on a second. So these are three areas of cremation that we consider. One is more of a pod where we can bury, a more of a green, eco-friendly type cremation where we can bury, place of ashes in a seed in the pot and bury in the ground. And the other, we can convert the ashes to crystals to form jewelry that family members can wear, as well as we can convert the ashes to vinyl albums where family members can listen to the voice of their loved one, as well as listen to the songs and things that they used to love. Okay, one more. So I'm gonna go through this. So there's three types of skills that we need to consider. There's three types of our brain works three ways: skill-based performance, rule-based performance, knowledge-based performance. Okay. A skill-based performance is a performance in which it's just routine, things that we do every day and that we don't have to think about. And what happens within those three errors that can potentially happen are slips, lapses, and fumbles. A slip is things that we do without intending. We do the wrong thing. A lapse is we intend to do something, but we fail to. And a fumble is we intend to do something, but blunder as we do it. This particular error is 1 in 100. So 1 in 100 decisions we make every day is that error that we make is due to a slip, lapse, or fumble. Okay, scroll by this one, click, scroll again. Okay, now one tool that you can use to prevent slip, lapse, and fumbles, and I'm saying this because we have to train our most precious resource, and those are our employees. One thing we can use is a STAR methodology, which is we can place these tools across within the funeral home, where our workers can see them, to ensure that they take their time when they're processing, because an error can happen, which is 1 in 1,000, where we make up to 2,000 to 3,000 decisions a day. One thing, they can stop, think, and act and review. So take a time to pause, consider your action, concentrate, care at the time, and review the process that you're doing to ensure that you don't make those mistakes. The next is a rule-based performance, meaning these are based on certification, different rules, different education that you've experienced. Rule-based performance can also affect the things that we do. And rules are basically following the rules. So in order to follow the rules, and rule-based performance is to always go and check the things that you're doing. Talk to somebody who understands the rules. Always review the SOP, the standard of operations, the process you're doing daily, so that you can ensure that that you're following the rules and you're not making no mistake. And one way to manage a rule-based error, to ensure that we're not making these mistakes, is to every day the funeral director briefs with the team about the agenda for the day. The team execute the task for the day, and there is a honest debrief after the day to ensure that all the things on the checklist were taking place. Okay, next. And one more. So the last is beneath knowledge-based decision. This is more of when we have to, 1 plus 1 equals 2 is more of a rule-based decision, but a knowledge-based decision is more of when you have to think about things. What's the ratio of water to disinfectant in a morgue or more sort of a morgue or a transportation vehicle. So when you're dealing with a knowledge-based decision, it's more of a complex time. You really have to validate everything you're doing. So there should also always be some type of rule, some type of standard of operation procedure manual, something around you that you can always check to make sure that you're following the right steps to avoid those errors. And the last thing is pandemic preparedness. And to wrap it up, what this means is, based on the changes from CDC and based on new technology and based on innovation, based on the practices, we have to consider how do we adapt and change throughout this time. One thing that we have to consider when it comes to making a pandemic preparedness plan is our human resource. How do we prepare them to make sure that they are safe in their spaces? How do we understand skill-based, rule-based, and knowledge-based concepts to create tools around them to keep them safe? How do we create the right training program also? But how do we identify the resources we need during the time of pandemic? How do we stop those resources? One last thing. How do we stock those resources to ensure that we have a plan for pandemic? But the main thing is making sure in your pandemic preparedness plan is considering the resources, considering the training, considering the fit testing and so forth for a better outcome in case a situation like COVID-19 happens again.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Wallace. We will now have questions and answers. If you would, please put your questions in the questions box, and Robbie will read those to you. Read those for you. Robbie?
All right, Dr. Wallace, I have a question here from Chad Hampton that says, how long is a virus viable in a dead body?
So research is telling us that it can be up to 7 days. So between 3 and 7 days. And a lot of this research came from Wuhan, China, and as well as most of it was confirmed through the CDC and Dr. Fauci. And although it's the virus is still alive in the body, it's how do we prepare it to ensure the safety? Thus, CDC suggests more cremations than actually going in and doing the embalming, which would create a higher risk of exposure.
Okay, thank you. I did see a couple of hands. As Mike said, if you could please just go ahead and place your question in the question box and I will read them. Right now I don't have any other questions unless someone is in the process of typing as we speak.
And while we're waiting on the questions, we're going to go ahead and have a poll. Right now, we're going to put our poll on the screen. And if you would, please look on the screen and click on the screen and click your answers. We'll take just a couple of minutes for that. Okay, we got about 30 more seconds for this poll. We're about 70%. Please get your votes in. All right. Well, thank you very much for your poll. We will, for your answers. We will share the poll results right after we have a couple more questions for Dr. Wallace. Let me unmute you back, sir. Robbie, go ahead with those questions.
All right. So I have a question from Lilana Ray. Do the temperatures affect the COVID virus?
No, that's there's a lot of talk about. There's not enough research on understanding do temperatures affect COVID viruses. At one point, there was talk about in the summer there would be a low transmission, but as at this point, we do not have enough information to make that a determination, or we don't have enough information to confirm that as a fact.
Okay. Next question is from Vicky Parks. Really, to reiterate your answer, when you said the virus can be alive for 7 days, the virus is not alive after embalming, or is it?
So, and that's a good question. So I'm gonna give you an example. So there was a laboratory where there were several bodies, and it was more of like a city morgue, and the bodies had been embalmed, and for at least 2 to 3 days, and people who were still working in that space, at least it was five morticians, and 3 of the morticians actually contracted COVID. They don't know if it was before the embalming or after the embalming, but they were protecting. They wore the right protective equipment, but I think a lot had to do with the air, the ventilation within the space. So to answer to give an answer to your question is, again, we're still studying the data, and I can't actually confirm whether after the embalming the virus doesn't exist or cease to exist at that point. So that's, yeah, to answer the question, I can't confirm that, but right now the safe part is to until we get all the information, is to just practice the best and safe procedures throughout pre-embalming, embalming, and post-embalming to ensure your safety.
Thank you, Dr. Wallace.
And let me say one other thing. If I once I get more information, I will provide that information to Curtis, and hopefully he can provide that information to you all and the participants today.
All right, I have a couple more, but I'm gonna try to squeeze these in. How accurate are the numbers of deaths due to COVID or underlying conditions? That's from James Collins.
So that's another great question. So COVID, especially when it comes to underlying conditions, that's when COVID is very aggressive compared to not having underlying issues. So right now, what we can say for sure with accuracy is that based on the symptoms that people with underlying conditions and those with not underlying conditions, how we code whether the person died from COVID is based on specific symptoms, such as they experienced a time where they couldn't taste and they couldn't smell. So based on every patient that comes inside of a hospital, one thing that we code is common symptom and specific symptoms. Once those specific symptoms show up, then we actually label them as COVID patient. Thus, the data is accurate at that point.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Dr. Wallace, for your presentation. You see Dr. Wallace's information on the screen. If you would like to send him any questions, or you can email your questions to, if you have any other questions that we didn't get to, you can email us at webinar@aurora.org. That's webinar@aurora.org. And we want to thank Dr. Wallace for his presentation.
Thank you. Thank you all.
And we're going to show you the poll results real quick from our poll. I believe it's shared. There we go. And the question was, what is your meeting preference for future funeral home symposiums? And the answer and the results are 61% prefer virtual as opposed to 39% in person. Now, please welcome back Gerald Curtis.
I hope this conference has met your needs.
There you go.
Okay. I hope this conference has met your needs. It appears by the poll that it has. I hope you received information you can use at your place of business. Please consider this conference as a small token from Aurora of our appreciation for you. You, the funeral directors, are vitally important to us. I've said that more than once in these past 3 days, and I mean it. You're very, very important to what we do, and we appreciate you. I know it's not always at the best time of day or night that these cases seem to appear for you, but you're doing the family a great service. You're doing the decedent a great service who may have wanted to donate, and we want to thank you for the families. And for our final closing thoughts, Tiffany Miles Self.
Hello, I'm Tiffany Miles Self, Director of Donation Development for Aurora. On behalf of Aurora, Ellen Cochran, our Executive Director and President, and the entire Aurora team, I want to thank you for your participation in our final day of the 12th Annual and First Virtual Funeral Home Symposium. Special thank you again to the Arkansas State Board of Embalmers and Funeral Directors for certifying this educational event for a total of 2 continuing education units each day, totaling 6 CEUs for those who attended all 3 days. Tuesday, Mr. Enoch took us through how to make amendments and corrections of death records when using E-Rate, the electronic registration of Arkansas Vital Event System, and that very important reminder that corrections need to be made within 10 days. And if you're running into physician delays, please let Mr. Enoch know so he and his team can follow up with that physician. Yesterday, Attorney Catlett took us through the ins and outs of the Arkansas Final Disposition Act and how best to satisfy the good faith effort test. COVID-19 has certainly changed our world. Emergency preparedness has extended far beyond natural disasters and active shooter events. Dr. Wallace gave us a better understanding of COVID-19 and unique challenges the funeral home industry has had to face. We got a glimpse of challenges faced in New York. It's hard to imagine the enormity of the challenges funeral homes face in both China and Italy. So what is your preparedness plan? How do you protect yourself, your staff, and care for high numbers of decedents as well as their families? Change is hard, and adapting to a new normal on this scale has been a Herculean effort. Who would have thought virtual services would be normal? All of us are committed to providing great care and compassion to the families we serve. I believe we all acknowledge the critical nature of first call. In all honesty, first call could be a number of things. For you, it is that first notification a family has chosen your funeral home. Your response to first call sets the tone for all that follows. Each day, every one of us is writing our story. In the end of our life, someone else will tell our story. Do we allow space and time for context to fully tell those stories? Are we considering the needs of others over our own? Are we embracing a continuation of someone's story that extends far beyond death? Over the last 3 days, Linda has reminded us to remember it is the family that is really our customer, and that Reaper is not a bad thing. It actually is one for us to strive towards. Reaper, the Reaper approach, respond. What is the experience design you create beginning with first call? Show up, ready to be on stage, and validate the contents of someone's bucket. Engage stories by filling the gap between first call and planning arrangements. Value is in the story. It's not in a checklist or assumptions. Allow space for time and context, for it is here where stories really come to life. Articulate options. Recognize religious culture shifts inclusive of the nones. Cremation does not diminish the value and need to remember and celebrate. Paint the picture. Ceremonies create a powerful picture and a powerful marker for reflection in the beginning of chapters yet to be written. Be the ceremony specialist to orchestrate all of it. Embrace ceremonies. Don't be death blind. This is one of the most important single events you will have with a family. Be open and creative, whether it's writing a message on a casket or the intentional fingerprint left behind. Refer. Meet the needs and set standards beyond just okay. Aftercare is vitally important. We serve the same families, and many of you are likely unaware of the continuum of aftercare ARORA offers to donor and spirit families in the weeks and years to come. Thank you for your time you have spent with us over the last 3 days. Hopefully you have gained several golden nuggets over our time together and will share these concepts with others. Whether you realize it or not, your support of organ tissue eye donations makes stories like Anthony's, Lane's, and Raphael's possible. We look forward to having your support in writing many more stories like these. And Raphael's story challenges us to consider, who am I assisting to leap to new heights? Whose heart am I helping to continue to beat? As an organ and tissue donor family member myself, I encourage you to protect the tender, delicate light that organ, tissue, and eye donation brings to families in the darkness of grief. It is often the first glimmer of light guiding us towards a positive grief journey. We look forward to having you back in 2021. A survey of today's presentations will be emailed to you shortly. And please don't forget to complete and submit the survey in order to obtain 2 hours of CEUs for today's event. Thank you again. We look forward to having you back in 2021. Have a blessed day.
That will treat that case with the utmost dignity and respect. Because here at Aurora, we have a very important mission, and that's all about saving lives. And Nora is part of that mission.
The mission of the OPOs and the transplant centers, it's huge. It's a mission of supporting families at the worst time of their lives and allowing something good to come out of tragedies that happen to these families and making donation happen, which then on the other end of the equation helps get people transplanted and helps tissue recipients and organ recipients in the community. We are here. We put vehicles in place. We hire staff in place that are available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, just for Aurora and for the services in the community that we serve. So when we're called, we're on call, we respond immediately, and we meet the needs of the OPO and the community through that process, and we're dedicated to that.
They only work for organ and tissue organizations. They understand what we need. They can document electronically all the information that is required, and they send that to their dispatch, as well as provide the information to Aurora staff. The refrigerated vans are so important to what we do as an organization. Keeping our donors cool constantly helps the process of tissue donation. Nora is a company that Funeral Homes of Arkansas can trust as much as we do.
It starts here at training. The one thing that I want to instill in the new drivers is that we are the standard at Nora. The professionalism that we display shows that when we're out in the communities, when we're visiting funeral homes, we're visiting hospitals, and they see us in uniform, they see us performing our job duties and showing the donors respect.
They've got training in what we expect from the OPO, how we expect them to interact with our partners, with our hospitals, our funeral homes, our coroners. They are representing Aurora. They are Aurora. I think ensuring that we are taking care of that person who is giving a gift of life, that's our utmost first responsibility. Nora is aware of that. Aurora is aware of that. That will always be our number one goal. Building those relationships with our partners helps ensure that process takes place as smoothly as it possibly can each time.
Thank you for attending today.